What's going on, football fans? It's me, J.R. Clark, back again with another rendition of the Pound for Pound. We did it. We got through the draft. The draft has come and gone. It has happened. And before we really jump into it, I just want to start off by saying thank y'all so much for joining me on Thursday night, joining me and Toby for the live stream that we did. I know I said thank you quite a bit on that live stream, but really did appreciate y'all showing up. I think at one point in time we had well over 100 people in chat with us, chatting it up and shooting the breeze, and that was a ton of fun. Something that I think maybe we can make an annual thing. Y'all seem to really enjoy that, and I know I had a blast doing it. So again, from the bottom of my heart, appreciate that. Thank you, and I know Toby appreciates it as well. All right, so let's just jump into it. The 2020 draft is in the books. We had 6 picks. And we started out our picks with A.J. Terrell out of Clemson. Now, we went into this draft releasing Desmond Trufant, so we kind of went into this draft with a need at cornerback. Now, leading up to the draft, it was very much heavily rumored that the Falcons were going to trade up, and looked like the target of the trade was C.J. Henderson out of Florida. Now, there are some loose reports that they tried to trade up to 9 to Jacksonville, but Jacksonville decided to stay put and take Henderson themselves. So, with that being said, we took A.J. Terrell with our pick at 16. Now, that pick has been met with like mixed reviews. I'm not necessarily like over the moon by it. I mean, I know that was a position that we needed, but A.J. Terrell is a solid corner and could prove us all wrong and end up being an amazing corner. But the thing that he is, I think he's finally could potentially be an elite version of what Dan Quinn's been looking for. Dude's 6'1", real long corner, real good in press coverage. He spent 53% of his snaps in press coverage, but I mean, he can play press and zone, could even bump down into the slot if needed. Just a real technical corner, real smooth and fluid with his movements on the field. I know a lot of people have brought up the national championship game. Look, that wide receiver from LSU, I think Jamar Chase, I think was his name, that everybody wants to point to, he made a lot of cornerbacks look silly. So, and Joe Burrow was playing out of his mind, which got him the number 1 overall pick. So, I don't know if I'm necessarily going to hold that against him. I don't know if anybody was going to be stopping LSU last season. So, with that pick, that solidifies him, I think, as your CB1. Now it'll be a fight between Isaiah Oliver and Kendall Sheffield to see who's going to play opposite of A.J. Terrell. So, right out the gate, you solidified a need. And you didn't have to give up anything for it. I think that's the bigger thing to take. I didn't know how I was going to feel about trading up, giving away assets to get a cornerback. So, all right, moving right along to pick number 2. Now, pick number 2 is where we start to get a little bit more interesting, where A.J. Terrell is a solid player and is exactly what you want in the first round as far as middle of the round type pick. Our second pick, I think, is a dog. I'm super excited about Marlin Davidson out of Auburn. Now, I'm going to admit, I didn't watch a ton of Marlin Davidson rolling into this draft because I honestly felt like we were going to, pick a defensive line in the first round. So I didn't watch a ton of him, but since the pick, I have went back and watched quite a bit of Auburn's games. And I'm going to go ahead and call it. Now I realize who I was looking at when I was watching tape of Derrick Brown. I saw who number 3 was, and that made me smile because that dude is a wrecker. He is just a big-bodied defensive tackle. I know Auburn played him as a defensive end. They stood him up in a 2-point stance quite a bit at 300-something pounds, 303 I think is what it is. So that was really crazy to see that big of a man standing up in a 2-point stance rushing the passer. But he rushes the passer real well. He plays the run real well. And I think he's going to be an interior force right next to Grady Jarrett that we've all been wanting. I mean, his stats speak for himself. You know, in 4 seasons, I think, as a starter, he's got 14.5 sacks, 90 solo tackles, 28 tackles for loss, 9 pass defenses, and 3 forced fumbles. I give you all those stats to tell you that he is active. He is super active. I think he had just as many sacks as, or not sacks, but tackles for loss as Derek Brown. So, I mean, he's an extremely active player, extremely strong. He's got that mindset that you want. I mean, in his combine interview, I'm pretty sure all y'all have seen it by now, talking about what he loves about the game of football is that he gets to go out there and hit a man consistently and the cops don't get called. I mean, that's a soundbite for the ages, right? Now, I'm not going to let a soundbite get me all worked up because we've seen those soundbites before, you know, find me later. But I think this brings a needed nastiness to the defensive line to go along with Grady and potentially Tack. I think by adding Marlin Davidson, our defensive line got a whole lot tougher. I can easily see him being, at least initially, part of the sub package, rushing from the interior, which is what I wanted Kinlaw for, right? If y'all remember, with next to Grady Jarrett. So I believe the two of them could be causing havoc in the middle for years to come, which has me very, very excited. All right, moving right along to our 3rd round pick. Now, we went defense, first 2 picks, so you knew they wasn't going to go a full defensive draft. We picked Matt Hennessy. Now, I saw a lot of you people get excited for the center out of Temple, not because he's a center out of Temple, but because his last name is Hennessy. And a bunch of y'all wanted to order a jersey with the last name Hennessy on it, which, hey, I mean, I think he'd probably get a kick out of that. But now back to the player. He's a 3-year starter. He played guard and center. I think he played mainly center at Temple, but he does have some experience at guard, which Dan Quinn on the press conference stated that he should be like competing for that left guard spot, which is good to hear because that was that was probably one of the bigger weaknesses on the offensive line. So now he's going to come in and compete with James Carpenter and Jamon Brown and Justin McCray and whoever's still on the roster. We're not 100% sure who's going to still be on the roster, but there's an idea that he's going to come in and compete. I was reading some of his stuff because there really isn't like stats that you can look at for offensive linemen. I wish we could come up with some, but there isn't really any stats to look at there. But one of his pro comparisons is Joe Hawley, our former center, Joe Brawley. And that's not a bad comparison. I mean, Joe Brawley was a good, Joe Hawley was a good center. I enjoyed him on our team. I thought he did real well in pulling in screens, passes, and oddly enough, that offensive line video I did a couple days ago, one of the plays that I showed was of the left guard and center getting out on a screen pass because that's something Dirk Cutter likes to do. So if he's got the athleticism to get out on those screen passes and get out on as a pulling guard to open up holes in the run game, man, I'm down for that. And everything else I read about him seems like he's just a very technically sound offensive lineman. And I'm down for a technically sound offensive lineman. Because if we hope to get our offense up and rolling, it is going to be with the offensive line solidifying and giving Matt Ryan time. I mean, we all know that. We've talked about that many times, and that's something that Matt Hennessy represents. If he comes in and can win that starting left guard job, I think it would be a boon for us for sure. All right, now we're getting into the 4th round. Now, the 4th round is where it kind of gets a little dicey. And what I mean by that is the 2 guys that we picked in the 4th round, a lot of people, analysts, experts, whatever you want to call them, had these guys slated to be going a lot lower. Now, TD has a reputation and for picking guys that make me go, who is that? Or make me go, huh? So it doesn't necessarily surprise me, especially not since Dan Quinn has been here. We tend to pick some guys for their versatility and for their athleticism over pretty much everything else. And that's what these 2 guys represent. The first guy off the board, Michael Walker. He was the first of the 4th round picks out of Fresno State. He was was for them a jack of all trades, a joker. He was their chess piece, their wild card, however you want to call it. He played a lot of his snaps at defensive end, but we have him slated as being a linebacker. Now this brings up an interesting point, because when I was watching him, he seemed kind of like a poor man's Isaiah Simmons in a way. What I mean by that is he's almost a positionless player. At 230 pounds, you're not going to put him on the defensive end, but he played a lot of his college at the defensive end. He also dropped into coverage and is slated to be more like a Devondre Campbell. I think that's where, what you were looking at when you replaced him, or when you drafted Michael Walker, was to replace Devondre Campbell. Obviously, you let Campbell walk, and you needed somebody. That was one of the positions that I was very concerned about going into this draft, was how thin we were at linebacker. Now, Michael Walker has a lot of real good instincts. The fact that he's had 22 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks, 10 pass deflections, 3 forced fumbles, and an interception. So he's got real good football instincts. I think that Jeff Ulbrich does an extremely well job with the linebackers, coaching them up. So I'm not so worried about him transitioning. I think that once they get him in camp and can really figure out where his skill sets are, I think he'll take over for the Devondre Campbell rush linebacker role that he had towards the end of the season. Towards the end of the season, Foye Oluokun took more of a role next to Deion Jones, with Devondre Campbell doing more rushing. So I think that's something you're going to see with Debo and Foye in the middle of the field. And when you do see Michael Walker out on the field, it'll probably be in like blitz packages and stuff like that, which I think could be well suited for the first few years that he is on the squad. Now he has some special teams ability and could be a potential core special teamer, and that's something that you always need. I mean, if a rookie can come in and provide you some special teams play and help out on the field, the more the merrier. Which brings us to our next pick, Jalen Hawkins. He's a safety out of Cal. He seems to be like all the analysts that I've read, because again, I'm not going to sit here and lie to y'all and say that I knew who these two guys were. I didn't. I hadn't heard of Michael Walker or Jalen Hawkins. So when we made those picks, I had to go start doing some research on them. And all the analysts seem to say that Hawkins is more of a box safety. Now, when I watched a lot of film on him, or the 2 or 3 cut-ups that I could find on YouTube, he didn't seem to be playing a ton in the box. So I'll be interested to see how that progresses, if he is more of a box safety. He does seem to be a hard hitter. He does seem to be a pretty sound tackler. He has, 105 solo tackles with 7 pass defenses and 10 interceptions. Okay, I want y'all to think about that for a second. He's got a ton of interceptions. So between him and KZ, and you're bringing back Keanu O'Neal, and you got Ricardo Allen, it wasn't the upgrade at safety that I was hoping for. Honestly, I was hoping for a safety in the first round over a corner, because I was wanting Earl Thomas. I think that's why you got away with some of the, subpar play up in Seattle, from the corners outside of Sherman, because of Earl Thomas. So that's what I was really hoping for, but obviously we didn't get that. And by all accounts, we didn't even get a free safety. So it looks like we're going to be rolling into 2020 with KZ, Ricardo Allen fighting for the free safety spot, Neal, if he's healthy and progressing, and now this kid Jalen Hawkins at the strong safety spot. So I'm not too upset by that. It'll be interesting to see how Raheem Morris deploys his coverages, because he tends to like more, cover 2 than he does cover 3. So it'll be interesting to see how this guy fits in. Now, the last and final pick is a punter out of Syracuse, Sterling, and I'm not even going to attempt to say his last name. right before this day 3 kicked off, we released the punter, the Australian punter, and I think it had a lot to do with the fact that he still couldn't get his visa to clear, and he was in Australia. And with all this COVID stuff going on, obviously he couldn't get over here and get in front of the staff. So therefore, they released him, and they said they were bringing in kicking competition. And it seems like this kid could be a place kicker and also a punter, or at least has done that. But I don't do, as I stated many times before, I don't do a ton of research on 7th round picks. So now the next wave will be who they snap up as far as undrafted free agents, because that's always, you know, really interesting. We have found some gems in the undrafted free agent area before, so it'll be really interesting to see in the days come how they fill that out. But all in all, I think this is a solid draft. You got, you know, players at your biggest positions of need, at cornerback, at defensive line, and at linebacker. You got at least a starting left guard, possibly, and a potential replacement in a year or two for Alex Mack in Hennessy. So that's a plus there on both fronts. Now, the guys in the fourth round, the linebacker and the safety, it'll be interesting to see how they get deployed, because the linebacker, Michael Walker, seems to be a really versatile defensive player. So I will be interested to see exactly how they use him. Same thing with Jalen Hawkins. Is he just going to be a backup? Because the fourth round is where you kind of start getting into that backup potential starter core special teamer area. So I don't ever expect a ton out of fourth rounders, but we have had success with Devondre Campbell and Devontae Freeman. So who knows? But all in all, I think this is a really solid draft. You pairing it with the free agency that we had, this team is looking a lot more solid than it did at the end of 2019. Now, obviously, we'll have to see how that factors out, or how what shows up on the field, basically. But I'm a little bit more excited now than I was before the draft, and we'll see if they add any other players in free agency, because there's still some pretty good names out there. This draft class should only cost you somewhere between $6 to $7 million. Come June 1st, when Trufont's money comes off, that should cover the draft class, and we may have anywhere from $4 to $5 million left over, so we might be able to add another veteran free agent, which would be interesting. But anywho, that covers the draft. I really appreciate y'all watching us, subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting. All that stuff's amazing. As we move into this off season, we'll probably have more breakdowns and on individual players and how they fit. So as we have more time to dig into the tape. But you can always follow me on Twitter at Grim1128. It's GRIMM1128. You can follow Toby at TobyD1991. Yeah, man, just follow us, comment, share, like. We enjoy interacting with y'all. And as always, Falcons fans, rise up.